You ever get that feeling that the history you learned in school was, well, missing a few pages? Like you only got the highlight reel? Turns out, you're not wrong. Some of the most famous stories we all know have been intentionally rewritten to hide what was really going on. So what's the real story? Let's crack open history's hidden playbook.
Okay, let's start with a classic, the Boston Tea Party. We're all taught it was about no taxation without representation, right? A heroic stand against taxes. But the actual history? It was really a revolt against a giant corporate bailout. The British government gave a failing mega-corporation, the East India Company, a total monopoly on tea, which would have crushed all the local merchants. So the colonists were fighting against crony capitalism, not just a tax.
And it doesn't stop there. How about the Statue of Liberty? She's a welcome sign for immigrants, yeah? Well, not originally. She was actually conceived by French abolitionists to celebrate the end of slavery in America. The very first designs even had her holding broken chains in her hand. But the American moneymen funding the project, they found that a little uncomfortable. So the chains were moved down to her feet, tucked away under her robe, and that whole abolitionist message was basically scrubbed from the story for over 100 years.
So you have to ask yourself, right? Why go through all this trouble to change the story? What is so important that it needs to be hidden? Well, the answer, as it so often does, comes down to money and power.
To really get our heads around this playbook, we have to talk about a concept you definitely didn't learn in school. The idea that whiteness wasn't some biological fact. It was invented. It was constructed as an exclusive economic club, designed specifically to control working people.
Legal scholars actually have a name for this. They call it whiteness as property. Now, that sounds academic, but what it means is simple. Being legally and socially classified as white gave you access to things other people were denied. Things like the right to own land, the right to vote, better jobs, better legal protection. It was a tangible asset, like a ticket to a better life.
And here's the kicker. Membership in this club wasn't set in stone. Just look at the Irish. When they first arrived in the 1840s, they were not considered white. They were drawn in cartoons as ape-like simians and forced to compete with black workers for the absolute worst jobs. But over time, by playing ball with the existing power structure, they clawed their way in.
So what was the price of admission to this club? Well, for groups like the Irish and later the Italians and others, the path was pretty clear. First, you had to distance yourself from black Americans. Second, you had to align yourself with the bosses, not your fellow workers. You had to help exclude black people from labor unions. And what did they get in return? Access. Access to segregated federal programs like the GI Bill and FHA loans, the very programs that built the white middle class while systematically locking black families out.
Okay, but here's the puzzle. How do you keep poor white workers loyal to a system run by elites who are also exploiting them? You pay them, not with money, but with something else. You pay them with status.
The legendary scholar W.E.B. Du Bois gave this a name. He called it the psychological wage. The idea is that even if you were a dirt poor white laborer, you got a little something extra. You got public respect, you could use the better parks, the better schools, the police looked like you. It was a psychological boost that made you feel superior, and it was just enough to stop you from joining forces with the black workers who were your natural allies.
And this history is exactly why the ideas of black pride and white pride are worlds apart. Black pride grew out of a fight against centuries of being told you were less than human. It's a defensive move to reclaim your dignity. White pride, on the other hand, became a slogan for groups who are celebrating the existing system of dominance. It's pride in the club, not in a culture that was ever under threat.
And this psychological wage became an explicit political weapon. I mean, get this. In a shockingly honest interview from 1981, top Republican strategist Lee Atwater just laid out the whole playbook. He explained how you stop using the overt slurs because that starts to backfire, and you switch to abstract coded language, words like forced busing or states' rights, to stir up the exact same resentments and win elections.
Now, let's fast forward, because that exact playbook, using coded language to create division for political and economic gain, is happening right now as we speak. It's just been given a new name, the culture wars.
Let's talk about the big one, the moral panic over critical race theory, or CRT. Here's the reality. CRT is a 40-year-old framework taught in law school. It's a way of looking at how laws and institutions themselves, not just individual people, can create and maintain inequality. And the most important part, it isn't, and never has been, taught in K-12 schools.
So why is everybody suddenly talking about it? Well, because the architect of the anti-CRT panic, Christopher Rufo, basically did a Lee Atwater. He went on Twitter and just admitted his whole strategy.
He said the goal was to take this obscure term, empty it of all its meaning, and then cram all of the various cultural insanities people are afraid of under that one brand, until it becomes toxic. It's a confession.
And here is the playbook he laid out himself. Step 1, find a phrase nobody knows. Step 2, strip it of its actual meaning. Step 3, fill that empty shell with everything you want people to get angry about. And step 4, just keep repeating it in the media until the phrase becomes poison. It's a masterclass in modern propaganda.
So you have to understand, this was never really about protecting kids from some graduate-level legal theory. The goals are much, much bigger. The real targets are things like creating so much distrust in public schools that people support privatizing them, or getting rid of DEI programs that actually track inequality and hold powerful corporations accountable. And of course, the big one, banning the teaching of the very history we're talking about right now.
So why does any of this matter to you? Because this isn't just a history lesson. This is a pattern, a playbook, that is actively being used to harm the economic interests of almost everyone, no matter what their background is.
I mean, just look at this. They want us over here, worried that some DEI program is the reason we're struggling. Meanwhile, over there, the pay gap between CEOs and their average worker has exploded to 344 to 1. The culture war is the magic trick, the misdirection, the massive transfer of wealth to the very top. That's the reality.
And this playbook is just so consistent. In the 19th century, the fear was black people will take your jobs, and the goal was to protect slavery. In the 20th, it was welfare queens are taking your tax dollars, and the goal was to bust unions and cut social programs. Today, it's CRT is harming your children, and the goal is privatizing schools and protecting corporate power. The fear changes, but the goal, divide and profit, is always the same.
The folks at the Race Class Narrative Project just nail it. They say, attempts to divide us along racial lines undermines any attempt to redress our shared and growing inequalities. In other words, every time we fall for the division, we make it impossible to unite and challenge the real problem.
All right, so let's boil this all down. What's the takeaway? 1, the myths we learn in history class are often there to hide economic exploitation. 2, the Club of Whiteness was never about heritage. It was a tool to keep working people fighting each other. 3, that division is the main thing that stops us from coming together to fight for our shared economic interests. And maybe most importantly, once you know this playbook, you start seeing it everywhere. And that's the first step to making sure it doesn't work.
Think back to the Statue of Liberty. Her real story wasn't completely erased. It was just hidden in plain sight. Those broken chains celebrating emancipation, they're still there, right at her feet. You just have to know to look down. And once you see them, you start to see all the other hidden truths too.